for being here. We are excited to be with you. My name is Kim Coffrin. I'm the Director of Education for Children at Risk, and we are excited to get started this morning with our annual Early Childhood Education Summit. We have lots to talk about. We are super excited about all of our panelists and experts from across the state and across the country that are going to share a little piece of knowledge, a little piece of their world and nugget with you that hopefully will improve things and give you ideas to bounce off of and to think about next steps as we continue to increase and improve our early childhood landscape and availability for young children and families. So if you're new to Children at Risk, we're a Texas nonprofit research and advocacy dedicated to addressing the root causes of child poverty and inequities. Our mission is to serve as a catalyst for change, to improve the quality of life for children through strategic research, public policy analysis, education, collaboration, and advocacy. This event is hosted in partnership with our Texas Family Leadership Council, which is a collaborative of family-serving organizations from across the state. You can view our agenda in today's program and get to know our featured experts using the links dropped that are in chat. And if you have questions throughout the morning, please submit those to our speakers in the Q&A function at the below, and we will get to those at the end of each little segment. Feedback is always critical in these events, so we can continue to improve and develop programs that are interesting and thought-provoking for all of us. So if you can, we will some feedback at the end of the session to give us some feedback on that piece. After the event, all registrants will receive the resources shared, as well as a link to watch the recording at your leisure, so or to share with friends. We want to thank our partners in this event: Child Care of America, United Way of Greater Austin, Texans Care for Children, the North Texas Early Education Alliance, the Texas Association for the Education of Young Children, Little STEM Academy, Early Matters Texas, Our Loving Village, Project One Day, El Paso Center of Children, and the Early Learning Alliance. So without your support, thank you. We wouldn't be here today. So thank you for your continued support and getting this summit off the ground. So with that, we are going to dig into our first little segment. We are going to talk to Christine Thomas, who is our Associate Director of our Center for Social Measurement and Evaluation here at Children at Risk. She has got some new data for us to dig into our desert maps. We analyze these maps each year. And Christine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kim. So hi everyone, my name is Christine Thomas. I'm the Associate Director for the Center of Social Measurement and Evaluation here at Children at Risk. So today I'm going to discuss the term child care desert, which is coined by the Center for American Progress. So Children at Risk built upon this idea of a child care desert definition that uses state-specific indicators. So these additional data shed light on the actual availability and affordability of high quality childcare. So Children at Risk calculates 4 different types of childcare deserts throughout the state of Texas. You can look at those different childcare deserts on our website. And these childcare deserts are areas where there's a significant population of children too young for public school and a lack of childcare providers to meet the demand. Sorry, my dog's barking. Today, we're just going to focus on 3. So overall childcare deserts, subsidized childcare deserts, and that's for working parents living below 200% of the federal poverty line, and then Texas Rising Star deserts. So each childcare desert is calculated using data from the U.S. Census and Texas Workforce Commission. And in order to qualify as a desert, there has to be at least 30 children, age 0 through 5, as well as at least 1 childcare center or registered home. The ratio has to be more than 3 to 1. So if it is, then it's a childcare desert. All right, so we know that the pandemic closed down quite a bit of childcare programs in 2021. So 21% is the number that closed down, and the majority of them are in-home childcare providers. So Texas Workforce Commission has been working really hard to distribute those relief funds to stabilize the early childhood education and care industry. So what did we find this year? So COVID money worked, we saw a rise in childcare capacities throughout the state, and those numbers are actually going to pre-pandemic numbers. So another thing we saw was that recovery is uneven. We have an increasing number of families living below 2% of the federal poverty line, and subsidized seats didn't increase enough to meet demand. We know that the pandemic forced parents out of the labor force, and as they're entering back in, they're not finding enough options for childcare. So COVID funding is going to run out in November of 2023. Funding childcare assistance, especially for low-income families, is crucial in order to keep these programs open. All right, so again, we said childcare capacity increased by 75% this year. We see that the number of zip codes that live in a childcare desert has dramatically decreased. It's been cut in half almost. This is great, but capacity increase doesn't necessarily mean enrollment. So even before the closures of many facilities in 2020 to 2021, we know that childcare was plagued by long wait lists, increasing costs, and unfortunately, we don't have enrollment data for all childcare programs in Texas. But we know that there were significant challenges in childcare availability for both high and low income families during the pandemic. This year we actually see a big disparities across access between the two income levels. And again, this map is available on our Children at Risk website, and we've highlighted where that funding starts and when it's about to end. So you can really inference yourself on what that will look like once those monies run out. All right, so when we look at what really drove these increases in capacity, so we saw a large number of programs open up or reopen, right? There was a lot that closed, and so we saw more openings. So it was really that drive and opening, so the child care relief funds that helped to drive that capacity up. And so, like we said, there's a big disparity between high and low income children and childcare. So, research shows that intervention like high quality childcare for children living in poverty has shown to increase high school graduation rates, which lead to increased earnings in the future. And expanding subsidy childcare really leads to economic benefits for the community and can bring families out of poverty. So we see that there's still not enough seats for subsidized childcare families. Seats have increased this year, but also the number of kids who need it. Reliable childcare is essential for economic and social recovery, and really for the stability of many families. Oops, sorry. So we talked to recovery really has been uneven. So I'm just going to highlight the map of Harris County right now, or Houston. Houston is big city in Texas. It has the highest number of seats, also had almost 100,000 seats added onto it. Compared to the rest of the states and different counties, it wasn't a high, childcare desert county, but we saw large amounts of seats poured into it. Looking at the map from 2021 to our current map 2022, we still see some red regions, and I want to highlight that those red regions have been red, which means it's a childcare desert, for the last 5 years. So we're seeing disparities in certain areas, and if you can, there's a really red mark in the middle of where it says Houston. That's the second ward. We know second ward is known to have a high immigrant population, so you can kind of infer the zip codes that are not getting adequate childcare seats, especially subsidized childcare seats. So again, key takeaways from what the data analysis shows, that access to childcare centers reduces the care burden of parents, promote child development, and creates employment opportunities. So we really need to think about, the COVID funding worked and we've increased capacity, but we need to think about the future and what's this going to do to the availability of seats once this money runs out. Again, we don't have those enrollment numbers for the state of Texas. We know that there's a long wait list for certain centers, that a lot of there might be capacity, but there's low enrollment because of challenges due to, maybe costs are too high. Low income families really find a challenge finding high quality childcare. Subsidies are, I think it's 30, 1 per 100 children. We really have to work on finding affordable, high quality childcare for these low income families. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Christine, for the data analysis. It's a good thing. We just had a press conference and Dr. Bob asked me if it was a good thing. Am I hopeful or am I nervous? And it's both, right? We've seen some good progress happening with this COVID relief dollar, and it's good to see those numbers back to pre-pandemic levels, but it's still also disheartening to see that we really haven't made progress in those low income areas for those low income families. And we have a long way to go, and we know this money is running out. And so what's going to happen in 23, what's going to happen in 24? What are those numbers really going to look like? And what are families facing, and our Texas economy going to face when the rug cut gets pulled out from under them? So lots of work to go. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate you. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so now we're going to enter our next panelist. Our first panel, this is Paving a New Path Forward. I'm going to be joined by my esteemed colleague, Jason Savo from our Frontier Strategies, and our very own Mandy Kimball. Excuse me, you choked me up, Mandy. Our Vice President and Director of Public Policy and Government Relations here at Children at Risk. So we are going to start off with Jason, who's really going to give us kind of what's happening, not only at the state, but the federal level around childcare. So if you can advance the slide.
Awesome. Can everybody hear me?
We can.
And first off, I'm sorry, I'm literally in the basement of the Capitol building, kind of where I sort of live this time of year. And it really, I think this is an opportune moment for us to be having this conversation, because I've been doing this, as some folks on the call know, for a really long time. And today, to be honest, is one of the more concerning days for me personally, watching what's happening in this building this morning on the next couple of weeks, and worrying about the work that a lot of us have done over the course of the last 15, 20 years, and what it means right now that, as opposed to Texas moving in the direction of greater equality, I think really for the first time, we're seeing some threats to kind of the position that we've been able to achieve and the work that we've all been able to accomplish over the course of the last few years. So kind of prefacing that, when my remarks today with a little bit of just very honest concern. But I think that we need, if we're going to understand kind of what's happening in Texas, I think that it's really important to put it within a national context. And if you're interested in that national context, I actually just posted in the chat on May 22nd, I'm going to be doing a presentation with the Bipartisan Policy Center, looking interestingly at folks on both sides of us in Texas. And we're going to be talking about what's happening in Alabama, which is a very Republican state, and a lot of interesting stuff happening there. And we're going to be talking about what's happening in New Mexico, which is a very democratically controlled state, trifectas in each place, meaning House, Senate, Governor in New Mexico, House in Democrat, House, Senate, Governor in Alabama, Republican. But they're both moving forward on a very positive child care agenda, doing things like spending state money. And when you look at what's happening across the country, I mean, there's a lot of progress being made. And I think as we just, one of the things I'd like to kind of contextualize today's conversation with outside of Texas are the fact that other places are moving forward and very aggressively doing things like and committing state money to doing this, not federal funds necessarily exclusively, but actually beginning to commit state dollars, beginning to look at how they can expand access, reduce co-payments, not just during the pandemic, but permanently, expand, income eligibility, like up to like 70–80%, like we're seeing in New Mexico. And I'm sorry, there's some construction happening here apparently. So if you can't hear me, it'll stop fast, I'm sure. But we're also seeing some real enhancements of quality around the country. And I think that that's important for us to know, as in Texas, we're not expanding access, and we're beginning, there's some legislation that's moving even potentially today that will erode the quality that we've been able to create in Texas in our mixed delivery model system in childcare. So all of that to say, there's some good stuff happening across the country that we can look to. And it's not just in places that people think are like, bastions of liberal thought. No, these are some very conservative places where good stuff is happening. We heard about a little bit of conversation about the pandemic, and I think that we need to contextualize what's happening in Texas during the pandemic with what happened in other states. Places like the aforementioned New Mexico and Alabama, they got those stimulus dollars and they thought, you know what, we could do one of two things with these dollars. We can use them on one-time, non-recurring expenses, kind of like Texas did, or we could use them as triggers for innovation. We can use these federal dollars to get the ball rolling on things that we could then implement later on with state funds. That's exactly what New Mexico did, and in many ways, exactly what Alabama did. And as a result, they were able to use those federal funds, not just to apply a Band-Aid and thinking it's enough just to hold things together, keep these systems from imploding. No, that's not enough. If we're being strategic about how to use the dollars like other states are, we could be using those funds to really push an agenda long-term that will use those one-time federal dollars for long-term sustainable impact. And we're seeing that in other states. So I think that those of us who are kind of looking at this moment where Texas is transitioning off those funds, yeah, it's good that we're not looking at, programs that are going to shut down because there's no state money. But what a missed opportunity for us to have gotten the ball rolling on programs and to really create the platform by which future state investment could happen, as we saw in other places. And one thing that I think that we all need to be mindful of that's beginning to show its head here, we've already seen this conversation in K-12. This legislative session, we've seen this session define higher education conversations, but the whole culture war conversations. The culture wars are coming, and we're seeing this in other states, including Alabama, and we're seeing it in places like Idaho. We're seeing it in other places across the country, Florida, as everyone knows, where we're beginning to see this creeping culture war, the pushback on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the pushback on social and emotional learning. All of that is creeping its way across the country, and I worry will eventually begin to define our political and policy realities in Texas in the years to come. Next slide, please. Now, if we're going to think about kind of where Texas is right now, I'm not going to surprise, and no one's going to be surprised to hear that the legislature's in session and we're not getting everything we want. We never do. Sometimes we get a little of what we want. Sometimes we get a lot of what we want. And hopefully we don't get nothing of what we want. But I fear that might be the direction we're trending, that get nothing of what we want or get very minimal of what we want. And we need to be very, very loud over the course of the next couple of weeks. Because if you have not been paying attention to the legislature for the last 125 odd days, congratulations. Well done is all I can say, because you're probably a saner and happier person than the people you see on your screen right now, Kim, Mandy, and I, who have been literally running around with our hair on fire. But now is the moment, if you haven't been paying attention, if you have been like, I always tell people, I'm going to become a Masters marathon champion, right? When I get older. Why? Because I've been preserving and protecting my body for this moment for the last 52 years, making sure that I'm not exercising ever too hard so that when I do decide to exercise and become that Masters older person champion, I'll be ready. That's those of you who haven't really gotten engaged this session that much. You have been saving I know it, you've been saving all of your enthusiasm and all your energy for right now. And in a minute, Kim and Mandy are going to give you some suggestions about things that you could do. Please pay attention, because we are at the cusp of a really big opportunity here. But if we don't all push that opportunity forward, we being all of us and all of our friends and allies and partners, it ain't going to happen. And it's got to happen now. I mean, now is literally the big push. Texas did have a budget surplus this session. You heard a lot about that. It's now going to go to pay for property taxes, to pay for border security stuff. Is it going to go to pay for enhancements in childcare, even though we know we have this crisis going on right now? I don't know. That's going to be determined by whether or not the people right now, listen, the 108 people participating on this call, Go and do something to make the people down the hallway right there, aware of and afraid of the people on this call, because the reality is things are trending in the wrong direction and we need to right the ship. Next slide, please. Now, I have to I spend a lot of time gazing into the crystal ball, right? Kind of thinking about how do we prepare ourselves now for the troubles and trials and tribulations yet to come. Two things I think we all need to be mindful of. I do a lot of work on immunization stuff. And we made a conscious decision in the immunization advocacy community in Texas a couple of sessions ago to move ourselves into a position of not just thinking proactively about how we pass good bills, but thinking reactively as well, not giving up on the passing of the good bill, but being very, very focused on really understanding that it is incumbent upon us to stop bad things from happening. Our work is no longer about driving a positive agenda forward all the time and pushing, hope and love up the mountain. Now our job is going to be ensuring that the things that we have pushed up the mountain stay at the mountaintop and do not roll back down. The worry that I have is the things that we have all worked so hard to accomplish over the course of the last 2 decades are in jeopardy this session going into next session. For a lot of reasons. There is a big push around things like the culture war. There's a big push around private equity entering childcare. This isn't just about the kids, my friends. This is about the bottom line. And people do not come to the Capitol. People come to the Capitol for mostly about money. Either they want money from government or they want the government to regulate their business differently so they can make more money. That's 99% of what happens in this building. It's money, 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 money. And that's the reality in which we're entering. So we need to make sure that we do not let our state lose sight of the fact that, yes, quality costs more because our kids are worth it. And if we're not going to push that message, what job are we doing? So we need to stay true to who we are and remember things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, it's 2023. We live in a state defined by historic racism. If we're not talking about that stuff, in my opinion, we're not doing our jobs. Social emotional learning and development. If we're not talking about that stuff, we're not doing our jobs. The conversations are going to get harder. The conversations are going to get more pointed. We're going to have this kind of thing happening to us a lot more than we're used to. Why? Because we're nice. We don't necessarily like to get into the rough and tumble. This is a rough and tumble building. And unfortunately, the things that we hold dear are going to be questioned. And when they are questioned in this building, the policy implications and the real world implications of those policy changes are all too real. And with that, I will shut up, I promise.
Well, speaking of money, Mandy, you want to give us a little taste of what, don't go anywhere, Jason, you're not off the hook yet. Give us a little taste of what we've been asking for in the session.
Yes, thank you. And Jason, thanks for the great overview. You can clearly tell there's 19 days left of the 88th legislative session. So it definitely is go time. But I'm going to talk about some policy priorities and issues that the Texas Early Childhood Education Coalition came out with this session. There's a lot going on. The childcare workforce, the industry has gone through a lot, and the data clearly shows that there have been many teachers, educators, providers that have come to tell their story on the struggles of making sure that they are at capacity within their facility, or talking about the struggles of keeping the doors open. Families have come to talk about what it means to have access to quality early education. And then you have the basically the business industry saying, where are our workers, right? We need workers. And the reality is that access to quality early childhood education is extremely important to a child's development, to families, and to our Texas economy. So the issues that we have highlighted throughout this session really touch on all that. And we need a Texas investment. Currently, Texas utilizes and tries to maximize the federal dollars, and will do the required match. But we don't really invest in childcare. And this is something that needs to happen. It needed to happen a while ago. It needs to happen today. It needs to happen tomorrow. And we've been talking about the COVID relief dollars. That was a great opportunity when we get $6 billion to basically have pilot programs, right? What worked? What didn't? We were doing one-time investments, and we can look at the data, we can talk to the providers, and we know that those stabilization dollars make a difference, and those dollars are going away. And so there has been a big push for a 2.29 billion with a B budget rider, and this is historic. Providers, advocates have not come out in this way asking for dollars, asking for investments. And it started before the legislative session. And as I mentioned, they've been at committees. The conversation is still going on. And Kim, I believe, when we wrap up, we're going to drop. There's conferees, there's House and Senate budget conferees, and they're the ones that are going to be negotiating the budget. And it is upon all of us to really reach out to them and make sure that they hear us so that they will go to bat for childcare. So that's the big takeaway. That will be the call to action. No spoiler alert, but we need to put pressure on making sure that Texas invests in childcare in an appropriate way. Besides the budget, there's a few other bills. So for reimbursement bills, there's a couple here that you see. And what they were doing is making sure that providers in childcare deserts, that providers who are serving low-income working families aren't penalized for providing the service. Texas currently reimburses based off of the lowest rate, the published rate, right? Well, if you're a low-income family and you can only afford so much. And so as y'all know, providers can only charge families what they're able to afford. And if they're a TRS 3 or 4, they're still only getting reimbursed on what families can afford, which is their published rate. And that just isn't right. They shouldn't be penalized. And so there was efforts to make sure that providers were reimbursed based on their quality and services that they're giving to their families. Unfortunately, I don't think that this is going to pass the finish line, but it is a conversation where we have had conversations with leadership and at the Capitol, and something that we would love to work with y'all during the interim to make sure that we can move forward on that. I forgot that I'm in charge of my slides. There you go. No, trying again. There you go. A few other issues that are a focus this session that are moving is pre-K partnerships. So in 2019, the Texas legislature passed legislation that required full day pre-K. And with that also really encouraged and enabled pre-K partnerships. HB 1614 is really helping the implementation of those partnerships, making sure that childcare providers can do so in a reasonable manner, and removing the administrative burden that is currently required so that they can have a full classroom and that it's feasible for their business model. So 1614 basically says that if you are a if you are a child receiving scholarships, childcare scholarships, that you can be eligible for public pre-K as well for those partnerships. So there's just some slight eligibility issues that are in question and bureaucracy. So that is removed to streamline. In regards to local workforce boards, there's legislation that is focused on making sure the proper representation on local workforce boards is there for childcare, so that there's some expertise and there's some guidance, that local workforce boards are more transparent in regards to the data that they're providing to WC, but also to parents, making sure that they're a good resource for parents and their websites. And then also looking at performance targets. It's not just about the number of kids, but it's also what kind of quality and what kind of efforts are being put place to support childcare providers and families in regards to accessing quality childcare. This last one on here around business and government investment. This is new, and I believe it was modeled from Kentucky. And it is looking at creating an employer childcare contribution partnership program that would be administered by TWC. So basically that businesses could put into and invest in a child care program or a contribution program. TWC would match those dollars, and that child care would be more affordable and more accessible, so that they can go to work. So this is a win on many fronts. That the business industry is wanting to get involved, that they're seeing that they can contribute, that it's valuable to their families and their employees. It would be a great way for TWC to help invest. It's a newer idea. So there are questions about how is this going to be implemented and what families would be prioritized, or are there regions that need more assistance than others? These are all questions that are being asked, but I believe in Texas, and if we can get this bill passed, that we would be able to work together to figure out what the best plan and model is for Texas. But it's some great strides that are happening. In regards to higher education, House Bill 2264 is an effort to support our educators and their career pathways, and ensuring that if you have a CDA, that would go towards your associate's degree, or that your associate's degree could go to your bachelor's. This is, again, conversations that have been had. I don't know if it's going to finish or cross the finish line, but it was excellent that we had committees. It's excellent that we had key stakeholders talking about how can we best prepare our educators and get them on a path so that we have quality educators. And what's also key is that compensation is there to back them up as well. And so it's a conversation that will continue. School safety. There's a conversation after Uvalde happened amongst the Texas Family Leadership Council, when a bunch of various stakeholders were coming together, and how can we support Uvalde and these children and families. And so great plans were being made, but someone did raise their hand and they asked, let's do what we can for them, but what about us? We see what's going on in the schools, and there's been millions of dollars funded through TEA to make sure that there's training for leadership, for educators, that they have the resources that they need to keep their staff and children as safe as possible. And there's nothing being provided to us. Those kids are there from 8 to 3, and then they come to us. So these school safety bills really are trying to maximize the dollars that are already being invested and be able to tap into the resources that school districts have. So if a school district is willing to open their doors and say, hey, we are doing some active shooter training or mental health training, and we want a community approach, childcare providers, please join us. After school providers, even private schools, come in and let's really maximize these trainings rather than having these other people go without or spend money on non-evidence-based practices. That is very close to passing. It's looking good. And then finally, the last bill that I wanted to mention was the tax relief for childcare providers. Jason mentioned there's a lot of tax relief going on, and it's really important for providers to say, don't leave us out. We're small businesses. We need help. Doors are closing. And we need to make sure that childcare, that our families can afford the childcare. And so making sure that there's tax relief to lessen that financial burden is really important. It's looking good this session, and we'll continue to follow up. I will say this isn't everything. So there are other childcare providers. We didn't put up everything that we're playing defense on. It's the juggle, right? It's how far can we go and what can we stop? And so there are 19 days left. After legislative session, we'll be holding a debrief, and we'll have a report to be able to get this information out to y'all. And then also there's the interim. And so what can we work on for interim charges to make sure that legislators are studying the issues that y'all think are important that need to be heard?
Thanks, Mandy. it's with 19 days left, there's lots of balls in the air and lots of last minute everything. So thanks for all that you and Jason do. Go ahead and advance the next slide. I just wanted to spend a couple minutes in the last few minutes of our panel to kind of dig into House Bill 3771 and House Bill 1834. These two are kind of to me, that when we think about the legislative session, they're very telling about where we are with our legislators when we're around early childhood. House Bill 3771 is from Representative Julie Johnson, who attended a national conference of legislators last year and learned about this great bill in Kentucky that Kentucky passed last year. And so it's really mimicking that work. And like Mandy said, it's this tri-share agreement where employers pay some of the childcare cost, the state pays a little bit and families pay the rest. So it's really geared towards helping families afford more childcare, and it's geared towards families that don't qualify for TWC in the current definition of TWC's subsidy. That would make just a little bit too much to qualify for those systems. But there's lots of questions around this bill. But the interesting thing about this bill is it came from a representative. It's led by that. And then, this bill kind of, was like, oh, Julie Johnson filed this bill, great. And it was heard in a hearing and it was all good. And the next time we went back and looked at it, all of these Republican leadership joined and co-authored. It is a huge bipartisan support on this piece. So as our representatives and our senators are starting to recognize that childcare is an issue, they're wrestling with how do we solve this? This bill doesn't address our compensation for our educators. It doesn't address helping providers keep their doors open, but it does help families, which is part of the piece. So it's really interesting to me, and we'll see where this goes. And if it gets across the finish line, it's through the House and over to the Senate. We'll see what money gets allocated to it and how TWC implements this if it gets passed. But it's very interesting to me that it's from a Democratic representative, has huge bipartisan support in the House. And I think it just goes to that showing that they're trying to figure this out, as does HB 1834. This was a bill that was very dear to me and Mandy's heart, and we're kind of heartbroken that it's not going to get across the finish line this session, but we're not going to give up on it. And this was to really help close that gap of getting reimbursement rates based off your quality rating, a program's quality rating basis on what the market rate is. And during the hearing, there was a good conversation, a very interesting conversation between the representatives themselves about if we pay more, if we increase our reimbursement costs, we're going to serve less kids, because they weren't increasing the funding level, because they weren't making that pot bigger. And so there was this conversation between representatives on both sides of the aisle about the need to increase our funding to be able to serve high quality and serve more kids and not do it. And there was this debate, well, you do it. Well, you ask for money. Well, you ask for money. And between the representatives themselves, and the hearings online, you can go look at it if you want to watch. But it was, so I think that it goes, to me, it tells me that during the interim, we really have to hold those members of that committee accountable and start to ask for those money and start to continue that. Okay, you had this conversation. How are we going to do this? How are we going to increase quality, maintain quality, and serve not just the same number of kids, but actually more kids? Jason, I saw you come off mute. You want to add something?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add in all this is I do think that, again, we're seeing this across the country, and the concern that I love it when employers step up and get involved in this kind of stuff. I think that's important. But let's put that within the context of, for example, how this country does health insurance, right, for low-income families. So if we begin to move away from this idea that things like high quality early childhood education, be it pre-K or childcare, are ultimately a public good. We don't question whether or not, businesses are going to support first grade education at all. Because why not? Because it's a public good. So if we're moving in a direction of where employers are responsible for providing childcare support, just like we do for things like healthcare, right? I work for myself. I have like a $35,000 deductible because I have crappy health insurance, right? A lot of people are in that same kind of a boat. So if we're relying upon our employers to do things like providing childcare, like we do with healthcare, we will continue to have this, gap in equity in terms of who's eligible and able to access high quality childcare. But again, we got to start somewhere. And if this is what it takes to get the business community involved, so be it. But it is, to Kim's point, not an end all be all solution. It's a step forward.
Exactly. And I think that's part of that conversation and you can just go to the next slide, Erica, that, as we think about this as we reflect back on the session, and we're not over yet, we've got 19 days, we'll see what gets across the finish line. But we do have bipartisan support. We do have members on both sides of the aisle that know there's a problem. They haven't quite found the solution. They haven't quite found the solution that's going to solve all the problems, but they're talking, and we've got to keep that pressure on for them to talk. We got to keep holding them accountable. We obviously need more champions. And we have lots of champions, but yet childcare isn't their number one issue. And so we got to make it their number one issue that they can really solve and use their political capital to get things across the finish line. We have a strong coalition of all of you, of our stakeholders across the state, providers, families, and that's really important. We're coming together for the, not for the first time, but even stronger than we have in years past. The pandemic has united us. And so we are, we're asking for that $2.3 billion together, locked arms across all of our different sectors in early childhood, which is fantastic. And so we need to be able to take that momentum and move us forward and figure out how do we continue to have that push. We'll see what we get on the conferences or not. And Jason said this business community involvement, not only House Bill 3771, but we've had, the Restaurant Association, and we had over a letter of over or close to 200 business owners send a letter to the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker urging them for money this year. That has never happened before. So we have this starting of this great business community, not childcare business community that is really helping to support our cause and be somewhat, unlikely bedfellows that we really are trying to build into that. And session isn't over yet, so there is more for us to do. So stay tuned on that piece. I am going to peruse. Jason, there was a question earlier about the use of philanthropic dollars in the state, and I'm trying to find the text of the question at the moment.
There was a question about the Kellogg Foundation in New Mexico. And, and it's a really interesting point, because the Kellogg Foundation for decades has been really interested and involved in Mexico and has driven a lot of the policy there. But if you talk to people in New Mexico, they get a little bit prickly about that sometimes, because they don't want the idea, they don't want this notion put forward that New Mexico can't come up with stuff on its own and isn't able to, kind of drive that agenda itself. And if you look at what's happened in New Mexico over the course of the last couple of years, it has been philanthropy very involved, but it's been New Mexico philanthropy driving the train. And there have been a lot, not just the philanthropists involved, but a lot of community. There's a group called OLE, O-L-E apostrophe, right? In New Mexico, that in many ways has really driven the train on electoral accountability associated with childcare. Right now in Texas, there is no electoral accountability associated with whether or not you vote the right way on any kids issue, let alone childcare. And I think that when that began to become real in New Mexico, elected officials there began to take these issues much more seriously. And then you began to see, a big statewide push, not just around the policies of early childhood, but recognizing that this is really good politics too. And there's a reason somebody like Kay Ivey, the governor of Alabama, is so interested in this issue. It's because, to Kim's point, the business community, the more traditional line business community, folks like the restaurant employers, the Restaurant Association, who employs thousands and thousands of people who access childcare every year, or at least attempting to access childcare at this point, that's a big deal that we're having this kind of a shift. So yes, philanthropy has been very involved from the outside, but what we really need is those philanthropists who aren't the Kellogg Foundation, but they're the small family foundation from the rural district where the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee happens to live, or something like that.
It's going to take all of us in the ship to get this thing across the shore, right? So all hands on deck. We also have, Mandy talked about, and Jason, about the budget conferences. We have a letter, and there's 10 conferences, I think is the number, 8 or 10 members that from the House and the Senate. So we have a letter that we'll drop in the chat that you can click on that PDF, copy and paste it, and send it to the appropriate legislators to push, asking them, they're the ones in charge of the budget, asking them for that $2.3 billion in the state budget. So I know there's a couple other questions in the chat box. We'll get to those. I think we can answer those on chat versus taking up time here. So we have not lost your question. We'll just answer them via text versus vocally. So Jason and Mandy, thank you for your time. Jason, I know you're going to sign off and get back to watching those hearings and doing the work that you're doing. Mandy, we appreciate all you've done, and you are great partners in crime as we over the last several months, as well as the next 19 days. I will see you both soon. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's switch back to our agenda and get our next panelist on board. We are thrilled to have our next group of panelists that are really looking at how we elevate lived experiences. We know that what families and bring to the table when we think about not just childcare, but social services and things that young families and families of young children need. It's really make sure that in order for us to make sure we're really pushing the right pieces of legislation, right pieces of policy change, right pieces of advocacy, that we're listening to what that lived experience is, not only listening, but really empowering them to be part of that process and part of that solution. So we have a great panelist today, which is going to be moderated by Troy Bush Didanto from the Episcopal Health. He is going to be joined by Dr. Olga Martinez Hickman, who is from the Beckman Lake Together up in the Dallas area, Jennifer Johnson, who is the president of Project One Day Houston, and Troy Oglesby, the director of Family Enrichment Services at the Children's Advocacy Center of Greater West Texas. That's a mouthful, Trey. So we are thrilled that you guys are all here, and I will turn it over to you, Troy.
Great, thanks, Kim. Really excited to be with you guys today and with the panelists. I'm going to be very transparent and say that Kim gives me extra points if I can make one of you cry. So I will be channeling my Barbara Walters. It's unfair that I have you three and not Jason and Mandy, because you can tell they're already on the edge with 19 days left. It would be so much easier to make one of them break. But we're going to kind of talk about family engagement and why this is important and how this has really shaped your programs and your organizations. And so very quickly, I'd like for each of you to just kind of share with us how you have integrated engagement in your families into your programs and your organization. And I want to start with you, Dr. Olga.
Thank you. So yes, at Beckman Lake Together, we were really intentional about family engagement and since the beginning. So what we do is we prioritize family engagement, and we don't only say equity, we mean equity. So the way we do it is through a dual generational model, considering the needs of both the children and the parents. And for us, it's very important because the people that we serve, a lot of times we talk about access and we talk about affordability, and that's extremely important. But our families, being predominantly immigrants, don't have the knowledge to know about why I should send my child to an early learning space or what that means. So following a dual generational model for us was really important so that parents and families, any caregiver can really be intentional too about learning about those first 5 years and what it means for a child to be kinder ready. And so those services that we design are really focused on that early education, health and well-being, social capital, and anything that's able to truly move the needle in early learning development and kindergarten readiness, but also the economic mobility of a child. So doing it of a family, so doing it together has really been successful for us, and not just focusing on an activity, but focusing more on a system.
Great, thank you. How about you, Jenny? Tell us a little bit about how you guys have integrated this work.
Yes, hello. I'm Jenny, and I'm the founder of Project One Day. We are a faith-based nonprofit in Houston, Texas, that generates free childcare for single parents in need. They have kids ages 0 to 3. And the way we did this is we have a unique model whereby we train the parents to actually be one of the teachers. So every one of our parents goes through the training to become a child care worker. And so for a class of 10 little ones, these are itty bitty kids, we have one highly qualified teacher that's there 5 days a week. And then those 10 parents, we label them A through J because that's 10 letters of the alphabet. It goes like this: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. So parent A volunteers every Monday at our place, 8 to 5. They're a teacher. They're put in the rotation. They're practicing those skills that we put them through. That includes CPR training, first aid, early social and emotional learning through conscious discipline, all of that. And they're practicing it that one day. And then the other 4 days a week, they get completely free childcare so they can work or go to school. And what this does is it creates a community where those parents are getting to know other parents who are trained in childcare and even relying on each other on the weekends, which is pretty awesome.
Thanks, Jenny. That's a great program. How about you, Trey? Tell us a little about what's going on there.
Well, I oversee 2 programs, Parents as Teachers. We do prenatal to 5-year-old, and then Family Connections up to 17 years old. Our main focus with the family engagement is really that partnership mentality. We go in trying to build the trusting and respectful relationships, and we try to bring about a shared responsibility for child growth and development. But through that, through the partnership mentality, especially, I like to describe it as like a safety net. We serve the majority of low-income families. We want to reduce the stigma of asking for help because we recognize that, they're living from paycheck to paycheck most months and sometimes have to do without. So in that safety net like mentality that we're trying to have for those families, we're going to reduce the stressors. Hey, where can we fill in the void? Are you needing diapers? Are you needing wipes? Are you needing formula? But not only for the children. What does mom need? What does dad need? Because we recognize that if the family is stressed, then there's only so much help that child is actually going to be able to receive, because there's all these other external barriers that if the entire family unit is not seen as needing the help, then the help isn't just, we can plant the seeds, but the garden isn't going to grow.
Barry, I want to stay with you because you were talking about partnerships. And one of the things that I think is important at the engagement level is really creating those partnerships. So how do you maintain those relationships so that the family engagement work is not just kind of a one and done, checked off the box, we talked to the parents and now we're going to be good? How do you keep them engaged? What kind of activities do you do?
Well, first and foremost, transparency. I've been in numerous homes, and you can just see the demeanor, the reluctance to open up and talk about the issues. And our first conversation is usually just breaching that subject, and I've talked about struggles I've had. I've talked about past abuse that I've experienced. I'm a disabled combat veteran with PTSD, and I tell them, I recognize that you could have PTSD as well, non-combat related, from other things. And it kind of gets them thinking about, okay, what am I feeling at this moment? And I find that you can that relationship starts to build, and then they do recognize that, hey, you know what, this is a partnership, and it's really just open and honest communication, and that's anytime I do an intake with a family, you can hear the reluctance over the phone, you can see the reluctance, in their eyes, and it's like, you know what, this is your safe space right here. We are non-judgmental. We are not looking to take kids away. We want to pour love into your family, because we know, I've got a 23-year-old son and a 3.5-year-old daughter. And I have parented from both ends of the spectrum. And I have said, man, if I would have had an instruction manual the first time around, my 23-year-old wouldn't be as messed up as he is now. If my parents would have had an instruction manual, I wouldn't be as messed up. I wouldn't have some of the issues that I have, and that's for all of us. So, coming in as a partner, they can relate to that because you got somebody in front of you that's willing to open their heart so they can feel safe to open theirs as well.
Yeah.
And it starts with love and honesty. I mean, that's where it is.
Nice. Thanks, Trey. Jenny, anything to add there around how you guys continue to engage your family and not let it be one and done?
Yes, that is one of my favorite parts about our model. So it's a commitment, right? Because they have to give a day a week. So that's like a big commitment of teaching, right? And sometimes they don't pull it off. Maybe they aren't showing up to their shift or whatever. And so we say, you know what? I don't think this is the time for you to participate in this. And we have to dismiss them from the program, right, to give that spot to somebody else. So it's kind of like they got fired, right? Because they were a teacher in our program. And they still come back. Like if we have potluck, they still come back and want to hang out with us, right? And they still text me pictures of their kids and how their kids are doing. And hey, and I get sometimes on a Saturday morning, I'll just get a text and say, hey, how you doing? From one of our parents that used to be in our program. And I think that's what he was saying is like, it's that relationship, but man, that takes time. And one of the benefits of this is that we have 8 hours a week to spend with that parent, right? Where we're rocking babies or say, hey, hand me Noel, change his diaper. And you make his bottle and I'll get his bed ready for nap, and you're working together and you're meeting their needs and practical needs. And that builds relationships so that when those kids are down for a nap, you can ask questions like, hey, so how's your mom doing? Or how was the funeral last weekend? And you're building, like you care about what's going on. And I totally agree about transparency. You can't walk in there and be like, I got it all together. Man, I am similar to that guy. Like I am in the throes of raising teenagers right now. This is a humbling season, right? And so you look back and you think of things that you would have done like differently, right? But it's also coming to them with transparency and humility to say, hey, we are all learning and growing and we all need to learn. So that's it.
Thanks, Jenny. Dr. Olga, what do you say?
I think everything that is said is so important. And for us, we've really been intentional about sharing the power. So for us, our families become part of our leadership structure. We wanted to make sure like the importance of they don't just come for one activity and then leave. So we actually have a leadership program, and that helps them to strengthen their expertise. And then they become that voice for their family and for their community, but also having them like a constant feedback loop into the decisions that we're making. So now they go through this leadership program, they're learning about early education, but they're also learning about advocacy. They're also learning just about different components. And then what we've done is we've created a space for families to be at every decision level making of our organization. So we have parents that sit on our board, of course, and you're not just going to come in and join the board, right? But like sit on our board, our steering committee. I include parents on my interview committees. I mean, I'm always thinking that the people that we serve, the people closest to the problem should be the ones closest to the solutions. Mm-hmm. So us coming in and giving them all the answers, it's not going to change systems. So having them engaged in the work that we do and even asking simple questions, having an open door policy is really going to keep them coming back, because then they feel that now they're equipped to go ask that question at the school that they may have felt intimidated about. And like Trey and Jenny said as well, it's all based on relationships, right? Building the trust, and it's taken years. And I've been there for 5 years, and it started even before I got there at Bachman Lake Together. So just really being intentional about providing a space for them and not just putting that on our DEI plan, but actually allowing them to have a voice.
Thank you, Olga. I'm so glad that you shared about the structure and how you're using families in decision-making, because ultimately, in our mind at the Episcopal Health Foundation, the ultimate goal of engagement is to really have that shared leadership. So tell us a little bit about how you guys started around building that structure and creating that structure that allowed for there to be real decision-making based within the parents themselves.
I think that a lot of the times there's this perception that parents of color, especially immigrant parents, may not have the they don't have the knowledge, but also that they're not interested, right? And for us, when we followed that dual generational model, we saw these parents coming back and back and back, like they didn't have anywhere else to go, and they wanted to help, but they didn't want to just make copies. And so I was lucky that when I started at Bachman Lake Together, again, 5 years ago, there was a plan that as we transitioned and got our own 501c3 and expanded our leadership, that we needed to include parents. And so for us, it's just ensuring that we were very open and honest with them, and that we didn't take it for granted that they knew what a board of directors was, or they knew what a collective impact model was. So those conversations, having to meet with them before a meeting, or having to, during the pandemic, we would always translate our documents, but then we brought language justice. So now it was, you speak from the language of your heart, and it's not always you that have to accommodate for us English speakers. Everybody felt safer. And so really just creating that safe environment and investing the time, and never taking for granted that these parents didn't want to do the work, but considering all of the other barriers, right? So we just started looking at funding and how can we incentivize our families. We have some moms that have been there for 10 years and they're giving everything and they are not working. So like, could we provide an incentive? Could we just looking at ways that that always kept it at top of mind, like what are we missing? Who are we missing? But really, that may not be a challenge for me. But if I have Denise or Erika there with me at all times and I'm talking to them, they're the ones that really know what they need. So keeping them as a part of that conversation.
Great. What is your center's vision for creating that shared leadership within the family structure?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Was that towards me? I'm sorry.
Yes. That's okay.
I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Would you repeat that question?
So what's the vision for the your centers using families to really be part of that shared leadership and decision making? Where are you guys with that?
One of the things that we do is we have certain little events that we'll do like once a month, and we'll do polls with families. What services would you like to see changed? I know that sounds kind of basic, like a basic just questionnaire, but it's one of those it's like a personable poll, if you will. It's not just a piece of paper handed to them and saying, hey, next visit, will you turn this in? It's one where we sit down and look eye to eye and say, we want to improve this to better suit you and other families that are similar. What kind of advice can you give us? And, we'll take their information and then we'll implement the changes as we see fit. And we bring them along with us, as those changes are going, and can say, see, this is what you've given us to go with, and this is how we're growing from that. And I think it's really bringing in the family, the care part of, once you do let a family know that all parts of that family are cared for, then they're more willing to open up. Like Dr. Martinez said about the, getting their perspective from the incentive and that care aspect, you create that safety, they know they can count on you, then you can go to them and be like, hey, what changes do you think you need to see? And that their opinion and their information is much more valued, and they know that it's going to be validated. And, that's what we do, like at every visit with a family, is ask them questions like that.
Nice. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Jenny, what are you guys doing to get to that shared leadership?
Yes. So 2/3 of our staff are parents. So they are in it with us, right? And we had made numerous changes. There is no one more vocal about how they want things done than a mother about her baby. And so, we have heard it all from like, so-and-so's kissing the babies too much, or, we need organic baby food, or I want to change this diaper because it's giving my kid a rash, right? And we we make all kinds of changes. I bought toys because parents want specific kind of toys in the classroom. And we've made policy changes, like pretty major ones, based on what parents wanted. And I love, though, Olga was saying about like putting them on the board. And that's a goal of ours that we want. I would love to chat with her more about that. And we're a pretty young organization. We've only been around a couple of years, right? But I want to do that. And we just need to find the right fit, because it needs to be probably somebody, I think ideally it would be somebody that graduated from the program. So they've experienced it and they have a heart for the mission, what's about, but not already swamped for time, because, the parents right now, they're already given a lot of time to our organization. So, yeah.
Excellent. So Olga, what advice would you give the panelists and those that are listening? What were some of the things that you did to help kind of build the capacity of your family members, so that we weren't just sticking them on the board and saying good luck, right?
Right. I think it's really, really important for us to shift our mindsets. And we are running organizations, but it's also important. Like I cannot say this enough, to listen. I mean, we just have to listen. Jenny mentioned her staff being parents. We have staff members that started off as parents and now are running our leadership curriculum. So listening and not just asking them for solutions or ideas, but implementing them. And then I think it's important, like, to recognize that even though some of us, and I can't speak for everybody, may have lived similar background experiences, those families are the ones that are facing them right now. I think, again, having a staff, especially a leader that represents the community that you're serving, it's so much easier for me because I speak Spanish and because I come from a similar background. And for us as well, like having, we're 100% Latina. We have immigrant staff. We have for our childcare that we provide. We have parents. Individuals that may live in the community or work with an organization that the families trust. So I think listening, building the trust, not taking things for granted, and always looking outside of ways that may not only be beneficial to us, but to the families that we're serving, always keeping them at the forefront, and remembering that mental health is tied to a lot of this, right? Like our families have experienced so much. So thinking of that as well, like how I approach a family may not be the best way, right? Like considering them. And that's why, again, it's important for me to keep the families in the loop so that I can know what's happening in the community and when something is sensitive and what resources I can provide.
Thank you. Jenny, one of the participants has asked about those teacher parents and do they get paid? So is that one day reimbursable, or is that their free day so that they get the other 4 days free? How's that working?
It is. So we had to do a lot of research on this to figure out that from an IRS perspective, like what are they? Like, are they just a beneficiary? Are they a staff person? And so we've settled on is that they are an employee who is being paid in childcare. So they are compensated for the training. We do compensate them for that, but for their day a week, they're not compensated for those hours because their value, their pay is the value of that childcare. But from like, we're still trying to figure out what the payroll services company, because there's still a withholding that's being done for that one day that they volunteer or teach that one day. That would be, it's kind of like one work day, and then you get all this, your pay is the childcare, if that makes sense. So
what kind of negotiating do you help the parents with their other employers? How does that work out?
I thought I was going to have to do that, and I really haven't. The employers have been amazing. Like, they really embrace this and get what we're doing. I even had a lawyer. One of the girls was a paralegal. And I thought for sure, like, the attorney would not agree to this. And the guy, like, basically agreed to just not have her one day a week. And she's teaching, and then the other 4 she works. But we've had everything, wait staff. We've had let's see here. There's like, a lady works at a bakery, YMCA swim instructor, like just all sorts of things. So that, it's been very flexible in that way.
Thanks. So you guys are all very coming at engagement really in a lot of different ways and in or different levels of engagement. So if you were to give advice to somebody that's really just beginning to engage their families, what word of advice would you have for them? What are those trips and tricks and tips that you can share with them? Trey, I'm going to start with you.
I would have to say first and foremost that if you don't love people, get out of the position, because that's the thing. You cannot fake it. I started young working with Department of Family and Protective Services, especially with the duly diagnosed adults. My wife and I worked for a decade with over 1,000 at-risk youth. And I can see all of that as what was shaping me to be where I'm at now. I would have to just say this as a quote. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And lastly, and this is one of the things my wife shared with me, but this is like, I've got this up on my wall that I look at every day. When you finally learn a person's behavior has more to do with their own struggle than it ever did with you, you learn grace. So we have to remove ourselves as the lens that we view the world, because we inadvertently stick ourselves in every situation and how it impacts us. And that's how we look at people. We've got to be able to stop doing that if we're going to engage families appropriately. So we've got to completely empty ourselves and be 110% for them in that moment and continuing.
Wise words, wise words. Dr. Olga, what do you have to add there? What words of advice would you have?
Be intentional. And also just like Trey said, like understand the people that you're working with, understand their needs, be adjustable. You know, we're being thrown curveballs all the time. We survived. We just talked about the pandemic, but like things have changed, right? And the way that families are engaged have changed. And then also understanding that everybody's journey is different, and the way that I'm engaged in my child's kindergarten classroom is not the same as the way that our families can be engaged. And so allow them to drive some of the solutions and allow them to help you to define the way engagement looks for your organization.
Nice. Jenny?
Yes. So I think going back to just the grace and love for people and having a heart for them, that is the key. That goes to the heart of our mission. We are a Christian organization, and I think that's the core of what we believe. God has grace with us, and we show grace to others, and we're all in need. We all have hard days. And what's so hard about this job is putting yourself in people's shoes, right? Because we all had different shoes, but listening to them of where they're coming from and why they're struggling. And just showing that love and grace upon grace. I think that is the best thing. So, yeah.
Excellent. So I've heard a lot about listening, giving grace, really allowing for those relationships to bloom. And I appreciate how much you guys have shared and how that is so much easier said than done. And that, one of the things that I'm reminded that one of my first bosses in this work told me is that if this kind of work were easy, everyone would be doing it. It is not easy, and no community is the same and no family is the same. And so I'm hearing a lot of resonating around that. So thank you so much for your time and your energy and all the hard work that you guys do. I feel so very blessed to have been part of this conversation. I know we could go on for hours, but I think our time, as Kim is staring at me, I think our time is up now. So thank you guys so much for being here, and have a great rest of your day. Kim, back to you.
Troy, thank you. And Troy, you didn't make them cry, but you guys all made me cry. So consider your Barbara Walters
Perfect.
check. You made it. So
I'll take that as a win.
Yes, take it as a win. And thank you, Troy and Olga and Jenny, for being here. Your message is loud and clear. It's that it's love and grace, and it's and meeting families where they are and moving them at the speed of trust, right? We have to develop those relationships, and that takes time and energy. And Troy, good words on if this was easy, everybody would do it, and it's not. So bless you for all that you do, and thank you for being here today. All right, we are going to shift gears and talk to some providers and some some community leaders that are helping both at the state, local, and national levels to improve and to address the needs of childcare and early care and education around the state and the country. So we had a little bit of a change in plans. Our friend and colleague, Cody Somerville, the Executive Director of Texas AOIC, is at the Capitol. We had a very last minute bill that got thrown onto an agenda last night. And so he is there waiting to testify. So our very own Caitlin Newell is going to, who's our Associate Director here at Children at Risk for Early Childhood, is going to moderate this conversation with us. And Caitlin, thank you for pitch hitting. And we're sending Cody all the good juju as he continues to do the work at the Capitol. Caitlin is going to be joined by some of my favorite people. Diane Gerard from our Child Care Aware of America. It's a national organization that partners with us and states across the country and to improve child care quality. Madison Matisse is the Director of Pre-K Partnerships at United Way of Greater Austin, and Austin's doing some great things in their local community of how to address needs of not only providers but families. And then two wonderful providers, LJ Henderson is the founder of the STEM product development and Little STEM Academy, if I can get my words correctly. And Britannia Bays is the CEO and owner of Our Living Village. So thank you all for being here. We appreciate your time and everything that you do, not only at the panel, but every day with young children and providers across the state and country. Caitlin, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you all for being here. Thank you, Madison, LJ, Britannia, and Diane. I'm really excited for this conversation. I'll try and do my best to fill in for Cody. But for all of you joining this webinar, I think you've heard from the first several sessions about the scope of the problem, the scope of the need to really build systems that serve families, that provide equitable access and quality, and that work in coordination with providers, local government, state government, and national government. Like Kim said, everyone has to be at the table. And changing the system, really transforming the system into something that helps families thrive is work for all of us. So today we're very lucky. We have people who see the system from different perspectives, local, state, national, and the provider lens. And so I'm really excited to talk with all of you. I have a few questions and hopefully we'll have a good conversation. So my first question is for Madison, LJ, and Britannia. And Madison, I'll go to you first. But the question is for all three of you. And that's, what keeps you up at night when you think about childcare in Texas?
Good morning, still morning. Thanks for having me, by the way. Yeah, Madison Matisse at United Way for Greater Austin. This unfortunately was not difficult, is not a difficult one to answer. And of the many things that I think I could say, probably any of us could, I do worry most right now about what we call, as everybody here probably already uses all the time, the workforce behind the workforce. I'm worried about the burnout of our teachers and of our directors, of our providers, of our owners. Childcare is in a dire state, as we've been learning about throughout this call. And unfortunately, it's happening a lot on the backs of mostly women and women of color. And I think that there is just an inexcusable lack of respect, compensation, benefits made available to the folks who are on the ground doing the real work. So that's what keeps me up right now.
Thanks, Madison. LJ, what about you? What keeps you up at night when you think about childcare?
Yeah, so for me, because I have both a 24-hour center and I also have a STEM focused school. The STEM school was actually grown during the pandemic because so many school age kids were not, in my opinion, well prepared. And so what keeps me up at night is what are we doing to make certain that the students that are leaving our pre-K programs are really prepared for kinder? And it goes beyond just high quality and introducing a new curriculum, but how do we embed the instruction in such a way that it's memorable so that kids actually grasp the material in a way that they learn it? And then to Madison's point, how do we create an opportunity for our directors, owners, and teachers to kind of be able to relax and stay in this profession? And so one of the things that I've done is I've come up with something called the SPA code, and it stands for increasing stamina, performance, and attitudes. And I've been working with that and teaching people how to actually teach our students, because I really do feel that our preschoolers are really tomorrow's workforce. And so that is what's keeping me up at night, just increasing, I say, the stamina, performance, and attitudes of the individuals that I'm working closely with in our field, and actually helping them to find ways to increase equity and access in their programs.
That's amazing, LJ. Thank you for sharing. And I'll finish up with Britannia. How about you?
Hi, thanks for having me. For the first time in 2021 during the pandemic, I had to make the incredibly hard decision to close down my childcare program for both financial and mental health reasons that stem from losing both my parents. And I haven't even had a moment to catch my breath and properly grieve from those things, because as a mother and an other mother, a village mother, at my program, Our Loving Village, I have to get up every morning and put on a brave face because there are 36 children and many families who rely on me. And right now, I'm driving myself crazy trying to, understand and not be re-traumatized of what happened back in, the pandemic, where I had to find jobs in between, like low enrollment, so that I can support my own family and stabilize a childcare crisis that my community was facing. And I'm so grateful to say that recently I've been able to get back on my feet, reopen my childcare program, but that has come at a cost. It's mental and financial gymnastics I have to do every day to make it work, and it's exhausting. And I'm constantly worrying about, how am I going to pay the staff that help me run my 24/7 childcare program? LJ and I are a handful of providers who do this work, but every day we're trying to make sure that we can keep the lights on for children. Actually, right before this summit, we had an electrical outage out here in our rural communities because our infrastructure needs help. There are more issues that families are facing, but as a provider, I have to juggle so many things, like how are we going to feed these children nutritious meals, and how am I going to have enough food for my own family to eat. So one of the things that keeps me up at night is, am I doing everything that I can to make sure that my community is not left behind? And I want to send a clear message to those in power over our early education system and what we have available to us as business owners and families, that we can't bear the cost of this underfunded childcare system alone. When we don't have a fully funded childcare system, the true cost of care is financial, it's emotional, it's socioeconomic, and it's really going to dampen all of the wonderful things that I know Texas is capable of. It's getting placed on the shoulders of women, especially Black and brown women like me, who are disproportionately affected by the wage gap, and making sure that this burden of caretaking doesn't just fall on our shoulders. We're asking everybody to be part of the village that it takes to raise a child, and to not let us be the only ones up at night thinking about solutions for this.
So well said. So well said. And yes, I think all three of you are right. That echoes a lot of the things that keep me up at night as well, is how are we taking care of the people who are taking care of our youngest people, our littlest people. Yeah, very well said. I think as we start to think about how do we address that, one of the questions that comes to mind for Diane is, maybe you could give us a little bit of an overview of what are the roots of the current childcare crisis, because we know COVID exacerbated this. Britannia, as you said so eloquently, it was a time of intense stress and trauma for a lot of people for a variety of different reasons, but that's not the root of it. The crisis didn't start there. So Diane, could you give us a little bit of an insight into the roots of the current crisis?
Yeah, and I think Britannia, you just set that up for me really well, where, when we look at the overall model for childcare is currently the way it's currently financed, it just doesn't add up. Like, the math isn't mathing, and it's what drives our past, our present, and future supply and affordability crisis, especially if we don't do something about it. And then just to kind of start way back, first and foremost, our childcare system across the country is historically rooted in inequities and underlying racism, classism, and sexism. Childcare has a really long, terrible history of being regarded as women's work, especially by women of color, which has come off as deserving of little or no pay, instead of a skilled profession with equitable compensation. So this has compounded and resulting in the historically low financing levels of our childcare system that we see today, and an undervalued workforce composed almost exclusively of female workers. 94% childcare workers are female, and of which a large percentage, around 40%, are workers of color. So thinking about the way that childcare is financed, states get funding from the Child Care and Development Block Grant, or CCDBG, and a few other funding streams to support their childcare subsidy systems. But it's not nearly enough. It remains significantly underfunded at the federal level. And as a result, programs do not always receive the support they need to comply with standards and then serve all eligible children. And there are about 15% of eligible children that qualify for subsidy, but are not able to participate. States, as we heard, I think Jason mentioned, talking about matching funds. States can also put additional funding beyond that into childcare, into their state budgets. Many states don't go beyond the federally required match, and that is a really big problem. And then when we look at the way that flows then to providers, states, predominantly base subsidy reimbursement rates on the average price of care that's charged by providers as determined in a market rate survey. But market rate surveys are more reflective of what parents can afford to pay, rather than, as Britannia was mentioning, the true cost of delivering high quality care. So there's problems at every single step of the process. We also see that insufficient public investment at the state and federal level results in families and then childcare providers to bear the burden of supporting the current system. We know that family payments alone are never going to be enough to cover personnel and administrative costs, along with mortgage, rent, utilities, food, equipment, general maintenance, upkeep, everything that goes into a program. And that leaves very little room in the budget for living wages for childcare providers. I know I'm just speaking everything that everyone on this call already knows. So I think my main takeaway is that there is a consistent undervaluing of labor performed by people of color, and especially women in the United States. That, combined with a reliance on a market-based system that depends mostly on families' ability to pay, has made early care and education one of the most underpaid fields. It's pushed childcare out of reach for many families, and it's caused supply to be way lower than it needs to be to meet the demand that exists. So lots of room for improvement, but this is, all the different factors that make up why we have this affordability and supply crisis.
Thank you, Diane. And like you said so eloquently, the math just doesn't math. In a lot of cases, there's just not enough money coming into the system to support providers with living wages and allow them to have a sustainable lifestyle where they are thriving and their businesses are thriving, and also not enough money into the system that families can access childcare in their communities according to their preferences. And that's just the system just isn't working. It's not serving anyone really. And so I guess my next question is around what we've seen in the past couple of years. We actually saw that tide shift a little bit with an historic investment in childcare through the COVID relief dollars. It didn't solve the crisis by any means. I don't want to imply that, but it was a historic influx of funds, of public funds, in a way that we haven't seen in our previous market-based system. So Britannia and LJ, and I'll start with you, LJ. I wanted to ask a little bit, what impact have you seen from these investments in childcare?
I think the staff retention was the main one, because I remember there were moments in weeks that I would cry and say, should I close my doors or should I open my doors? Because we were all nervous. We didn't know what was going on during the pandemic. And to be able to have 15 staff members that I was able to maintain, that came to work every day, that was with me every day for those essential workers, was just a very rewarding thing. And then to be able to give them bonuses because some people were out of work. So we had a lot of families that went from a dual income family to a single income family, and to be able to support those workers that now had additional expenses. Like I literally had one of my staff members that was living out of her car, but being able to support her, not just from my own pocket, but to be able to give her a staff bonus and things like that, and to really show the appreciation financially in a way that I haven't been able to do just because of how our rates are reimbursed. I think that was huge. And then to also be able to expand my program to offer things like STEM, to make certain that I could actually now hire more qualified individuals to actually help me with the instruction, to maintain the students that I did have, and to actually expand to do more work in the STEM field, I think has just been an invaluable resource.
Thank you. Britannia, what about you? What have you seen as the impacts?
I am super excited that, Texas has been shining a light on childcare deserts. And as one of the areas who is classified and has received money through the Reach and Expansion Grant, my community is really rallying around to make sure that we have collaboration to be able to make a sustainable childcare plan out here. Our Loving Village is not just a business to me, it's a lifestyle that I'm creating for my community. And we want and strive to be that high quality educational childcare program that's in a family environment. We want our people to be supported as they get back to work, but it takes so much of these funds. And when we already are resource stripped in our rural communities, we need to make sure that Texas is prioritizing it, not over any other setting, but just to make sure that, again, we are not left behind. One of the other things I want to mention is that non-traditional hours. LJ and I both have programs that really do that, but we don't see that funding meeting the need of those needs. We have parents, again, like LJ said, who were dual and now single, but I have very much carried some of the burden of those mothers who are working 2 or 3 jobs just to make up that second household. We need to make sure that our subsidized program is accounting for all of those things and making sure that each childcare setting has equitable access to those funding cycles. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to harness the Texas Essential Workers Program, even though I had parent staff who qualified for subsidy. And it's because of policies that really affect our practices. These mothers are doing what they need to and working at my program full time, but in our area, we don't have funding. We currently have families who are eligible, but our workforce board does not have funding to place them. And this is not going to go away. We recently had a childcare program on the neighboring county closed down and gave parents 44 days notice, and that left 60 families without care. And I had an influx of calls, doing the best that I could to try to make sure I can fill that gap of care. It still left 20 of the 36 children that I'm able to care for with my 24/7 model. It left those other families struggling. And many of those parents have now since lost their jobs. Many of them have also had to deal with the foster care system. And that's unfortunate when we can have this funding come through and actually really support our businesses, but not only our businesses, our families. When businesses don't get access to it, it makes a ripple effect, a domino effect for the families that we serve. And that's one of the things that I want to uplift as Texas continues to put forth funding at a state level.
Britannia, I think that the way you described the interconnectedness of families' well-being with providers' well-being, with really our whole community's well-being, our whole state's well-being, I think is really well said. And it's something that I feel like we have to keep getting across to legislatures to continue this funding, to continue this influx, because LJ, as you said, those funds, when they are there, allow childcare providers, early childhood educators to continue to care for children, to continue to care for their families, and to care for their colleagues, to take care of each other and to take care of that community, because we have to take care of our teachers in order for them to take care of children. We can't expect the adults to care for children if they themselves are not thriving and well cared for. So I appreciate you all's perspective on that. Madison, I know that you've observed the state funding opportunities, but you've also been involved in some really creative things that are going on the local level at the city and county. And I was wondering if you can speak a little bit to what you've seen from your perspective on this issue.
Yeah, and I have to start by saying this is the work of my boss, Kathy McWhorst, who is the Vice President of Success by Six, which is a local coalition of early childhood advocates and agencies. She's on a plane to go see her son graduate from Gonzaga right now, so I get to step in. But I will say, getting to serve on the leadership team for this coalition recently, I've done a lot of, I've gotten to do a lot of observing and kind of figuring out what the general approach is to this coalition. So maybe being a kind of, latecomer to it is going to be beneficial in helping to explain it a bit. So in 2012, a group of, as I said, local agencies and early childhood advocates in the greater Austin area formed Success by Six. United Way is the backbone organization for this coalition, and what they're doing is creating a community-wide strategic plan that they're presenting to both city and county governments in the hopes that they are going to endorse those plans. And then the ultimate goal, of course, being that through continuous conversations, they are aligning investments from both city and county, as well as policies with some of the strategic plan from the advocates and the agencies on the ground, and including providers. So I think it's important to say too, that the coalition really kind of picked up steam right around 2019, which was crucial timing. And so it was meant to be, I think, at that point, that we were moving a lot of really big initiatives in the city and county. And really the general approach, I would say, is, when choosing what policies, what investments we're asking the city and county to make, is basically this: if there is not going to be a major overhaul in the state of Texas to figure out how to do this well, how to fund and support childcare, then we're going to try to get some smaller wins, try to chip away at some of those barriers that exist in our local government, to hopefully make implementing affordable, high quality childcare more sustainable over time. And then, as the logic goes, making it more sustainable for the providers and their staff, you are then making it more accessible for the families in your community. So just some high level big wins. And I will say this too, upcoming, I'm excited. It's great to hear Brittanya talk about this, because I know, a preview of what we have kind of coming up through this strategic plan, a lot about non-traditional hours. There's some surveys that we're doing right now at the local level to determine what should some of our priorities be at the city and county levels for that. And also a cost modeling project to determine what is the gap of care here between what we're being reimbursed at, what providers are being reimbursed at, and what it actually takes to provide high quality care, because it's a heck of a lot more, and we all know that. And so we'll take those results and bring it to our local governments and say, this is the reality, help us figure it out. But in the past few years, some exciting things, the city included some pre-K startup funding for new classrooms in our area. They also were able to waive some fees for waivers like food establishment permits, environment and licensing inspections. These are small savings over a year, but it amounts to at least a pat on the back, or at least acknowledging that these are really important and essential functions of our community. Also, the city is now requiring that any city-owned or leased developments consider any childcare, possibilities in any of their new development projects. They have changed some zoning requirements so that it hopefully makes opening up childcare and expanding childcare a little bit more feasible, and especially for childcare homes. So they made that a little bit more accessible. Incorporating childcare programs into the text emergency alert system, which is more in Central Texas. And the one that affects my program, Pre-K Partnerships, at the county level, we were able to receive some ARPA investments, which, you know, from relief grants, but also went into some systems funding like Pre-K Partnerships in our city, and allows us to create the hub that is essentially, you know, helping to provide the mixed delivery system in all of our local childcare centers. So they've done a lot as a coalition. I say they because it's a huge group of people, but when you're able to identify specifically at a local level what it is that might move and get a small win, I think that is not only just for morale, a really important piece of the puzzle, but it's also, I do believe, really creating some structural changes and some mindset shifts in the local government, that this is something we need to be funding. Let's continue to figure out ways to move forward.
Thank you, Madison. I think that's very exciting to hear about how the local community is working together, utilizing funds, leveraging local interest and commitment to try and create that hub. It kind of sets me up for our next question, though, that actually came from the audience. And Diane, I'm gonna kick it to you on this one. And that's really thinking about what are some of those broader solutions and approaches that might be needed, because we're talking about the local, we're talking what local governments are doing, we're talking about what providers are doing to try and, you know, survive, make this sustainable for their staff and for their families. But someone in the audience pointed out that historically the federal government has bailed out industries like airlines, railroads, car industries, any industries where it's directly impacting the flow of the overall economy. And so there's a question about what solutions or approaches are other states using to address the looming childcare crisis? How do we message to government leadership about the impact on the wider community of the childcare industry? How could we make them see it in the same light? I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, about what other states are doing and what's possible in the federal space.
So this past Tuesday, Childcare Aware of America had, or this past week, had our annual conference. And on Tuesday, we were on the Hill, and I can share some, you know, feedback from what we heard from meeting with federal lawmakers first before getting it more into states. But the meetings were positive. We were asking for investments, increased investments in the Child Care and Development Block Grant, CCDBG, during the appropriations process, and making sure that cuts to childcare are not happening. I personally met with the Florida offices and received really positive feedback that I think there is, you know, and coming off of those meetings, kind of feeling like maybe there's a bit more of a shift. I think we've seen childcare has, in early learning has, I don't want to say become trendy, but it's become a very common topic in the last 2 years, because we were kind of forced to look at it when families could not access care, kids were home, and then going back into their workforce, you know, families were struggling to find care. And I think you have people that are like, well, why is this so hard? And starting to realize that, like, childcare educators, early learning educators are not making the money that they need to be making. You're seeing workforce shortages. And they, you know, something needs to be done, right? Like, this has become a problem for everyone at this point. And we are seeing some positive data that I want to share with you. We just got some 2022 data on supply that covers years 2021 through 2022. And we have seen that the supply in childcare centers is returning and has returned to pre-pandemic levels, meaning it's still not nearly enough, you know, to meet demand out there. But I think we can make the connection that federal relief funding nationally has made a difference. It has brought programs back, at least supply, to what it was in March or February 2020. However, we're not seeing that same increase with family childcare. We are still seeing a decrease in the supply of family childcare. the most utilized type of childcare across the country. So that's really concerning. And with the funding also having deadlines coming up very soon for states to use it, sharing that message with our policymakers. This is what we shared on Tuesday. Like, this funding has made a difference. It's been effective, and we need to keep doing it. Like, that when this runs out, it's going to be a big problem. And we are seeing an actual true return on investment. It makes sense. It's making that huge difference for families, for providers, for communities, for businesses, for everyone. And then getting more into, sharing that data, sharing that messaging. We think that also sharing data, dovetailing that with stories and experiences from providers and educators, and families is really important. But I do, I think states are, and I know Jason got into this a little bit, or that states they're keenly aware of looming deadlines on the federal relief funding. They know that this funding has had an invaluable role in helping make childcare, improve the quality, affordability, accessibility. And we are seeing that some states, not all states, are beginning to make their own big investments in childcare, more so than they've done before. We saw that some stats in 2021 from the National Conference of State Legislatures that lawmakers enacted twice as many early care and education bills that they track in a typical year. So this is also trending in state legislatures last year. And then this year, many states are still wrapping up their sessions, their budgets, but we are continuing to see states use their state general funds to invest in childcare, especially to continue policies that were first started with relief funding. And I think we'll continue to see this trend, especially into the fall of next year. We saw that childcare was a popular topic in governor's state of state addresses and their budget proposals in both blue and red states. And just to rattle off a few that Jason hadn't mentioned, in Missouri, we saw that the governor proposed a $78 million increase to childcare subsidy rates and established 3 new childcare tax credit programs. Ohio's governor proposed increasing subsidy eligibility for families and allocating $92.2 million over 2 years to bring more children into the program. North Dakota, we're really excited about. They just allocated, the governor had I think a $75 million ask in state funding in his budget, and they passed $65.6 million in state funding to continue expanded subsidy eligibility, incentivize childcare programs to take on more infants and toddlers specifically, and then cover all childcare costs for families making less than 30% of the median income, which is about $32,000 a year for a family of 4. So go North Dakota. That's really great. That's a really red state. Idaho increased eligibility this session from 145% of federal poverty level to 175. 2 more states, I promise. We are monitoring legislation in Montana right now. It's with the governor. It passed both houses, but it would expand eligibility at a minimum back to 185% of federal poverty level. They had done this with federal relief funds and it ended in January. I think they're getting some pressure to reinstate that because it really made a difference. Capping copays at 9% of family income, and then reimbursing providers based on enrollment. West Virginia, they didn't pass legislation, but administratively announced they were going to use TANF funding through August 2024 to reimburse providers based on enrollment. So I have a couple more states. I won't go through all of them, but it's like we are seeing improvements in red states. And then these are just red states that I'm sharing or purple, but blue states, we're also seeing big improvements on passing state funding to support compensation efforts and investing in bonus payments and wage increases. Connecticut and Maine come to mind. So yeah, we are seeing great things happening. It's really exciting.
That is really exciting. And it is always good to remember that states that have a similar political environment as Texas, they're finding solutions. The money is there, the solutions are there. It's up to us as advocates, as community members, to help make it a priority. Like Jason said at the beginning, make it a priority for our legislatures to find solutions as well. So we're coming close to the end, but I just wanted to ask a short question and then we'll do wrap up. The first is, we've talked a lot about access. We've talked a lot about how we invest in a systematic way on the local, state, or national level, but we also know the importance of investing not just in access, but in quality. So LJ, I'll start with you. one sentence, what is one component that has to be included in high quality care?
I would say STEM. The future of education is STEM.
Mhm. Britannia, what about from your perspective?
No more unfunded mandates for workforce education and quality improvements, please, and thank you.
That is well said, both of you. I think that's both are very important as we think about quality. And so then finally, we started with what keeps us up at night in childcare. We kind of took the conversation through the real challenges that providers and local governments are facing, as well as some things on the horizon in other states that could be solutions that could work here. So we're going to end with hope. And so I'll start with LJ. We're going to end with what gives you hope?
As I look around, I see innovation around me every day. I see opportunity around me every day. And I think if we can embed that during the critical period of development in our children, then we are truly raising the next generation of innovators and creators, and we will benefit from their discoveries later on in the future.
Absolutely. Madison, what about you? What gives you hope?
I hope this isn't cheating, but it's providers like LJ and Britannia, because I was at the early childhood rally at the Capitol Day. I heard everybody speak there. Having providers who are so wholly in it and whose whole hearts are in it, but are also being savvy about going after what we need, and not being afraid to talk about it to the folks who are making the decisions. You're kind of heroes. We talk about you like true heroes that you are. So thank you.
Thank y'all.
I don't think that's cheating, Madison. That's how I'd answer if I were on the panel.
Thank you.
Britannia, what about you? What gives you hope?
As many of you mentioned, it starts with us. We have to be the change makers. We're raising up little change makers every single day. And the efforts of organizations on the state, local, and national level, like Success by Six, Olay in New Mexico, and national platforms like Childcare Changemakers that I've been involved with, are out there keeping our communities organized. We make sure that we are advocating for what we need. And we know that there is a solution out there. We know that 1 in 10 children that are born in the nation are born in Texas. And we're calling on our Texas lawmakers and everybody, our community, to start realizing that childcare business owners and childcare voters are telling everyone that we are worth the 1%. It gives me hope that we have the $2.29 billion on this Texas state legislative session right now. It's not a long shot, it's a sure shot. It's going to stabilize our businesses so that we can keep our Texas economy running. And we have to remember, it's very essential that we understand that it takes a village to come up with the solutions. Our economy runs on childcare. Childcare is good business, and we want our children to thrive here in Texas. So we have to be part of the change maker solution.
Thank you, Britannia. Totally agree. And I'll end with you, Diane, looking across from your perspective, what gives you hope?
I think our collective advocacy efforts over the last 2 to 3 years have grown so much, and we are centering provider and family voices. I think we're doing a better job of that, and in making this movement happen. And again, like, it's exciting to see that states, okay, with federal relief funding, maybe they were forced to make some changes, but I think they've now realized that, like, that was step one, and that these have mattered so much to people and made a difference that they're like, oh, we actually have to figure out how we can sustain this absent federal funding. I think I came off the Hill Tuesday really energized, which I'm not sure I was, super expecting that to be the feeling, but I really am. And I think we are moving. We are like finally moving, even if it's very small steps at a time. I think we're making some changes, and in a positive way for the most part. And I think that's been really exciting to see basically in every single state.
Thank you, Diane. Well, thank you all, Madison, LJ, Britannia, and Diane, for sharing your expertise, for sharing your experiences on this panel. I really enjoyed talking with you. And I hope for those of you listening, I hope that this helped understand some of what the experience of the childcare workforce is at the local, state, and even national level, and also leaves you with some hope about paths forward. And I'll turn it back over to Kim.
Thank you, Caitlin, and ladies, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your passion. I knew when we pulled this group together, it would be great, and we weren't wrong. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you all. You know, and everyone, thank you for hanging in there. We are coming to the close of our time, and kind of to recap my thoughts, you know, we first looked at data, and it sounds like what we're seeing in Texas is also what we are seeing across the country. The money worked. We're seeing more supply, but our work's not done because we know there are low income communities that are still short. We know the family childcare piece of the equation is not back to where it needs to be. We know our quality initiatives are not where they need to be. We need to have more people onto those programs. But looking at that data really helps us see how do we pinpoint our next ask. We then heard from our legislative updates with Jason and Mandy, you know, and Jason said, you know, it's the best of times and the worst of times in state government. We've got some really good things going, some possibilities going, but we also have some warning signs, and we need to be ready and be prepared so that way we can really push forward. We have a big budget ask. There's a link to that ask to email those representatives and senators to make that ask another push for that $2.3 billion. So feel free to scan those QR codes and get that up and going out. We'll send it out in our package as well. We heard it from a great panel about lived experiences, and we know that relationships, transparency, and shared leadership are key to making sure those lived experiences are not only vital to our work, but vital to those families that are part of that work. And so making sure that we are going there with clean hearts and learning where meeting those families where they're at and bringing them to where they want to go. And then finally, our last panelists of providers and local and national experts looking at what we are doing as a society, as a country, as Britannia says, a village, to really take care of our childcare industries. Because we know when we take care of the children and we have that industry there, the rest of the economy can thrive, and that's where really our goal is to provide that high quality care for our youngest learners, so they can be all that they can be and get them ready for school and a lifelong love of learning, but also then to support our economy throughout Texas to be the best place to live. All right, with that, thank you for being with us today. I appreciate all of you taking time out. Thank you to our partners for partnering with us and spreading the word about the summit, and always our partners in crime and passion for childcare and early care and education. We appreciate you all. Thanks. Have a great rest of your day. We've got more summits coming up on various topics that Children at Risk covers, so feel free to scan that QR code, get on our mailing list, and we will keep you informed. With that, have a great rest of your day. Hopefully it is raining or sunshine, whatever you need in your area. It's threatening rain here. So we appreciate you all and have a great day.